What common skill do you lack? I'm only a CS student with 1 semester from my master's, but I can say you aren't alone. I have a bookshelf full of CS books that I've only read a small portion of. Can you believe that as a freshman I thought a collection of CS books would impress girls? My girlfriend of almost 4 years now says that collection almost turned her away, but the bookshelf has only gotten fuller since then. Oh, pick me. I have an exercise that helps. I have mad shaky hands. I learned that you can strengthen your hands by taping weights to the top of your pencil and drawing that way. Just keep in mind you have to put them at the top of the pencil. https://www.amazon.com/dp/b07lc3zd4lc/ref=underscore s95rfppb5 bas6vxvrnm?encoding equals @fate and psc equals 1. You can use these, or a bunch of nuts and washers from a hardware store. I struggle with this sometimes because I've vowed not to be my mom, who I love, but who is self-admittedly a bitch outside of her immediate family and whose first instinct is usually to show her fangs. Sometimes, all the cringe and anxiety I felt through the years actually pushed me to be too nice, so when I should legitimately show some fangs, I really struggle to get out of benefit of the doubt mode. Coming from the other side of this, chronic people pleaser, go along to get along expert, once you can get past this, it feels friggin' amazing to stand up for yourself and be okay with people having to deal with their mistakes. I hope every last one of you gets to experience that. I work as a school bus driver, and it has been an interesting experience thus far. The pandemic closed things down in March, and lasted into summer, when a lot of kids would usually have summer school. I had been out of work since March when schools had closed their doors, and was eager for some kind of work to do. Over the summer, many drivers including myself would come to work, get our bus ready, head to a school and pick up numerous coolers full of school-grade lunches, and head into various neighborhoods, church parking lots, and apartment complexes to hand out these lunch kits to kids who were not able to get their meals from school because of the pandemic. It pained me more than I had ever felt being a school bus driver when many of these kids would come up to the bus alone, and thank me for bringing them the one meal they would have for the day, before walking back home and often sharing what they had with siblings who were too young to come out. I gave out extras to the kids I knew were taking care of others, and thankfully we never had a day where we ran out of lunches to give to them, but I will never forget the hardships I observed of these kids and how much extra perspective the pandemic gave me into their day-to-day lives. How much hearing impaired people were affected? My mother, who wears hearing aids, also depends on reading lips, especially in louder, busier areas. Hearing aids can have trouble sorting through complex noise situations. You can imagine what happened when everyone covered their mouths. Now she's more isolated than ever. Since then, I've ran into a coworker who is also hearing impaired but doesn't want to return to office because while she can read lips on Zoom, she won't be able to if we mask up in person. They were an invisible casualty of this pandemic. Edit. The response to this has been more than I expected. If anyone has links to their favorite organizations to donate to help the hard of hearing, please share them. I hope the stories below help us all be a little more empathetic to each other. Thanks. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, but I still have survivor's guilt. The guy in recovery next to me passed away in the middle of the night. We had our hospital dinner hours before and we had a great conversation. As just before we went to sleep he said, "Hey, I really like you, man. Once we get out of here let's get actual dinner." I said absolutely, anything would be better than this stuff. Later that night, I heard his machine go off. We were blocked by curtains, and heard the nurses and doctors come in and wheel him out saying to get the defibrillator. I don't remember much, but that has stuck with me mainly because I thought I was next. I figured I'd never see my wife, family, or friends ever again, so I was trying my best to come to terms. I didn't find the peace everyone says you find near death. Anyways, after 47 days 10 in the ICU, I was able to leave. Year and a half later I'm here telling you all about my experience. I do still think of that man often. I don't remember his name. I don't know what he looked like. I just know our conversations helped us through. Yep, and there's going to be knock-on effects from this for years to come. Those parts are hard to come by because they weren't being produced in sufficient numbers for perhaps a whole year or more. Since the manufacturers weren't manufacturing, a huge number of them went out of business permanently. Every downstream supply chain that relies on any product that isn't being produced is royally screwed, which could cause them to go out of business, and then the companies they supply to, and so on and so forth, until all the dominoes are down. And now instead of 93% of everything we touch ultimately being owned by 10 conglomerates, it will be 95%, rinse and repeat every 5-10 years, and it's how we went from hundreds of independent companies making our stuff it's now a dozen. During a recession or pandemic usually everyone gets hurt, but the last 20 years only the middle and lower classes get hurt. The upper classes actually continue to make money. First off, you are a beautiful muskox, but I've been seeing the same thing in my industry. Anyone with enough capital to make it through 2020 is now in a great position to buy up the smaller organizations, and most of those small organizations are still reeling. So a chance to sell now is much more appealing than it was 2-3 years ago. Suppliers who used to be great to work with are buried in red tape and tedious procedures as a result of trying to integrate with their new owners. The pandemic is making the rich richer, and it's been hard to watch it unfold in real time. My dad works in education, specifically related to technology. He says he occasionally logs onto K-5 classes and it's an unmitigated shit show. Teachers trying to sing the ABCs while kids completely ignore her, grandparents accidentally turning the camera off, broken Chromebooks left and right. Middle school is just as bad for different reasons. He is convinced that this pandemic will result in one of the most underdeveloped generations of kids in decades, and we'll be feeling the effects for quite a few years to come. A close friend of mine works at the local high school. Our district is fully back this year and she says there has been a fight every school day since they started. I blame the lack of social interaction during COVID coupled with the fact that there are stricter rules now for minors, under 18, being out alone for the same reason. Constant fights. There's just no outlet for some of these kids to interact anymore. Gone are the days of being dropped off at the skating rink, mall, movies to hang put with friends. They only see people online now, and we all know what being faceless on the internet can do. Less cancer and other serious diseases diagnosed and treated, less needed surgeries performed because of the hospital staff being reassigned to COVID wards, less referrals written to not overwhelm specialists, in-person health services becoming harder to reach, so less conditions like skin cancer diagnosed. The health of all of us suffers, not only those affected by COVID. This is so true. My brother had cancer and started chemotherapy. He doesn't drive and lives in a small town. I went and drove him the 35 miles to his treatments. I had to wait in my Jeep for 5 hours or so in the middle of winter in Minnesota because everything was locked down. It was hard to get things like tests done. It was way harder for him than when I had the same cancer and treatment regimen 25 years earlier. I unfortunately had a patient in the ER die from esophageal cancer 2 days ago. He wasn't even 40 years old. It was caught late because he couldn't get in to see his primary doctor in person. At the start of my shift on Sunday, he was talking in full sentences and completely alert. We worked so hard to keep him alive throughout the day. His nurse was a saint, but 12 hours later he was dead anyway. Fucking sucks. In my opinion, the darker effect is definitely the people with other illnesses that couldn't get treatment because of the lockdown rules. Many people couldn't get life-extending radiation treatment and are no longer around. Somehow I feel there could have been a better alternative to no treatment. People that didn't get COVID but do have ongoing health problems were less able and less likely to get the ongoing care that they would normally get. What you're seeing now is an uptick in 911 calls and visits because their conditions worsened and now have become medical emergencies. The health crisis that this pandemic caused is much farther reaching than just the people that got COVID. Source: I'm a firefighter. I agree. I understand how someone with a maintenance or janitorial job cannot work from home, but 90% of my work is on the laptop, and when we were closed to public it made zero impact on my performance. Yet, as soon as we could be back in office, we were, because our customers need to see us. Meanwhile, everyone above me on the ladder is working remote from their summer homes in other states, and nobody has even been in our corporate office for 18 months, and it's a bit frustrating. People who were furloughed had time to realize they hate their job. I can only speak in service industry, but it feels like a soul-crushing job more than ever. I used to love bartending, and now it feel trapped by it. Everyone I talk to seems to feel the same. The money doesn't seem worth it anymore. Guests are worse and more entitled than ever, and staff shortages have made shifts harder and longer. It has left me with a sense of hopelessness, as it's the only career I've known, but I cannot imagine a future continuing to do it. The staff shortage at my job has made me want to quit more than ever. I used to get regular breaks with multiple coworkers in my department, and now I'm lucky if it's me and one other person. I know quitting would make it even worse for those coworkers I would leave, but if it isn't tempting. I'm not getting paid enough and everything is more expensive since COVID. Edit for clarity: I don't work an office job, which some people have assumed. I am also still working on my degree, which makes it even more difficult to try and find a new job that works with my class schedule and that I'll get enough hours in. I'm not wanting to go to retail either, so my options as an undergrad are pretty limited. Also, as for expenses, rent, groceries, and gasoline are much more expensive since COVID started. All I have gotten is a 65-cent raise per hour. It would pain you all to know how much I make per hour. It got so bad where I worked, they're pinching pennies so much that they made the call to continue working despite a gas leak 2 feet away from an open flame. I confronted the manager about it and he screamed at me and told me to leave if I didn't feel safe. I called the emergency hotline at the gas company and they evacuated the whole building and it was fixed in an hour. They ended up firing me and I was one of their best employees among a skeleton crew. Yes, I reported them to OSHA. No, it probably won't do anything. Yes, the restaurant was filled with customers. Yes, the gas worker's meter went off as soon as he opened the door. No, they didn't give a reason for firing me even though I requested one. Yes, I know it's illegal to operate a business during an explosion hazard. No, there's not much you can do about it. I am a therapist working in bereavement and attached to a local hospice. The past 18 months have been brutal. The amount of trauma and instances of stalled or complicated grief responses I have seen have definitely increased. Not being able to mourn the death of a loved one properly, not being able to be with them as they die, not being able to visit them, not being able to hold proper funerals, not being able to hug each other or sit near each other when saying goodbye. These things are massively increasing the difficulties in people being able to process their loss and grief, even when the person has not died of COVID-19. We rely on these rituals, these mourning processes, these avenues of community support, to help us come to terms with and cope with loss. So many of these comforts have been denied to people, both to those dying and those who are being left behind. It has been a grueling and incredibly depressing 18 months in this field, and I believe that we are going to see a huge amount of unresolved trauma and complicated grief over the next few years. Edit: grammar. My granny died from COVID last November. The hospital she was in for 2 weeks before she passed wouldn't let us go in to see her. When we knew she wasn't going to make it, all they could do was set up an iPad in front of her so we could video chat with her while she was dying. Even though we couldn't go in, 7 of us sat in 2 cars right outside in the hospital parking lot so we could be as close as we could to her. I don't feel like I've gotten the right closure still since she's passed. I didn't get to hug and kiss her goodbye. I still find myself about to take my phone out to call or text to ask a question about something I'm cooking or baking. Or I'll pass her memorial candle with her picture on it and I'll realize she's really gone. I really miss my granny. My cousin killed himself last May. The family only just had a memorial for him. Over a year later, that lack of closure killed me, mentally. Couldn't see family to grieve with them. Even when they finally had the service, I couldn't get to it. I wound up having a memorial on my own because I needed it. I needed that, almost, permission to grieve and say goodbye. And I know I am far from alone on this horrific experience. No. You're not. My mom died in a nursing home in NYC March 2020 from COVID. As it was happening I was dodging COVID deniers. Not only could I not attend the funeral, the cemetery was closed to all visitors for months after. Due to other unforeseen circumstances I have yet to even see my mother's grave. Edit. I can't respond to each of you but I really wish I could hug you all. Thank you all so much for the kind words and also for sharing your story. We need to share and we need to know we're really not alone. Thanks lovely humans. My dad died in June last year of cancer. He died at home so we could be with him, and his wife and his 3 kids were there. But no one else was able to be in the house, and saying goodbye through a window is not right. No memorial service, no hugs from our large family, and worst of all when you die in such a hard year for everyone it feels as if he's been forgotten. I know he was loved, widely and deeply, but he's just gone and there is so little to remember him by and my family and community have their own problems right now. I hate this feeling, like a giant felon no one seems to care or notice. I'm so sorry for both your losses, a loss from suicide and a loss from COVID. Both sound so awful in their own ways. For what it's worth, I am thinking of you. My husband's mother and brother both died just before everything locked down. They didn't die from COVID, but they were the last of my husband's immediate family. Everything shut down the day after the memorial service, which sadly was my son's 16th birthday. It seems odd to say this, but for the sake of my husband's well-being I am glad they died when they did. The circumstances were odd enough as it was and I think my husband would have had a more difficult time without having the funeral. That said, my husband drives around with the ashes of his 2 brothers and his mother in the trunk of the car. I have presented him with several different options to place them, but he has low-key rejected them by saying, "Thanks, I'll think about it," and the ashes stay in his car. I have tried to get him into grief counseling but he won't go. In the beginning, all these animals were snatched up from the shelters for adoption or foster in my area. Now people are going back to work and school and don't have time for these animals. Some didn't really think about what pet ownership would be like and no longer want them since they're out of the cute baby stage. People are dying from COVID and families are sending their animals to the shelter. People are losing their homes and need to move in with family or into a new place that doesn't allow their pet. They can't afford housing, let alone food. Eviction moratorium schmarian. People were getting kicked out of their places still. I've heard many say they couldn't get their pet fixed because the vets were closed so they accidentally got pregnant and no longer know what to do with the offspring. Shit sucks. The amount of time it takes me to remember what I had to eat earlier today, or what I've done this week scares me. I pride myself on having a sharp memory, but that only ever applies to video games anymore. That's such a sad thing, that the only thing that catches my interest enough to commit it to memory anymore is a bunch of pixels on a screen that ultimately mean nothing. That being said, playing video games with friends has kept me in a better spot mentally than many others. Scrolled down looking for this one. I feel relatively certain that supply chain disruptions are basically going to be the norm from now on. I work in a field adjacent to supply chain management, And there's an entire orthodoxy that's been built up over decades about the value of leaning out your supply chain and minimizing inventory costs and using just-in-time delivery. All of this is built upon a set of assumptions about the world that COVID exposed to be a complete unsustainable fabrication. We're going to be dealing with the after effects of COVID on the global supply chain for years after the pandemic eases, and we'll end up dovetailing right into climate change upending norms all over again. Some companies and industries might adjust eventually, but you're overturning decades of established practice. It's going to be in fits and starts. As a personal consumer, I think it's better to hedge your bets and just expect there to be ongoing, unpredictable disruptions in the availability of oddly specific things from now on. It's obviously not as dark as the long-term effects of COVID on health or education, but the impact is going to be just as widespread.